And you see, again, I hope from seeing Tom, Simon, the kind of instructors, the kind of attitude towards filmmaking that we have here at Raindance. I always say we do not teach filmmaking at Raindance. We make filmmakers. And we're humbled too by the quality of the people that teach for us, and probably the most humble in front of the most experienced. And the more IMDb credits than I have hairs in my head than Mr. Jurgen Wolff. Welcome, Jurgen, and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Shall I set off on our little journey here? I feel like I've had a whirlwind with Simon. I think I need to sign up for all of his courses. It's fantastic.
No. Sign up for yours. We always learn so much listening to others.
I think you should sign up for each other's courses because Simon, Jurgen is not a director, never will be. And you're a writer, and Simon, though he does write, he directs more than he writes. So it's a really good, mashup.
I always want to, but whenever I hear like Jurgen or somebody speak, and I think, God, that's such good advice. You just have to fight not telling other people in your own course the same advice, and you feel it's a bit of a, this is, I've so often done that with Raindance, listened to people and thought, God, that's great. Why have I not told people that?
Yeah. Hey, Simon, before you head off, go in the chat box and send a message.
Yeah, I'm just answering the question.
For Zana,
now, so
yeah. And Mr. Wolff, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to make this a very practical 15 minutes or so. I will mention the course briefly. It's the Script Coach series, and it's very comprehensive. We start with generating ideas, both ideas in a major sense of ideas for a whole movie, but also techniques, very specific creativity techniques, brainstorming techniques, etc., that you can use throughout the process of writing and creating the characters, coming up with scenes, etc. And then we talk in second week about characters that come alive on the page that are memorable, because almost every movie that we cherish, when we think about it, the first thing we remember is the characters in it, much more than the details of the plot. Then we talk about structure and going beyond the sort of typical formulas that people have. There's nothing wrong with the hero's journey or 3-act structure, but there's a lot more to it than that, and we go into some alternatives. We also talk about something that isn't covered in a lot of courses, which is how to deal with rejection, how to stay motivated, and the little sample that I'm going to give you today in the next 12 minutes or so is about getting unstuck, and that's something we'll talk about more also in week 4. And the last week, week 5, is what I call guerrilla warfare for the writer, which is what do you do once you have a finished script? And how do you go beyond what most people do to stand out in marketing your work as well as having the work itself stand out? And so that's a quick whirlwind. It's very interactive and very comprehensive. And I hope that you'll give it a look. But for now, I want to talk about a couple of things about staying motivated, about finishing your script, about overcoming issues of becoming stuck. And one big one is to expect what some people call the dip. And that means that in the middle of the process, often in the middle literally of Act 2, writing Act 2, you will find that's the point at which you start to be discouraged. You may feel less motivation than you had, less momentum, because you've already come a long way at that point, but there's a long way to go. And just knowing that that's normal, that is something that most people, most writers experience, helps you a lot, because then you know it's not something that is unique to you, that is part of the process, and there are ways to overcome it. But the big danger is that at that point you may have a new idea, and it's all shiny and new, and you think, oh, wait a minute, that's a better idea. Maybe I should ditch this script I'm working on now because this new one sounds so great and seems so full of so much potential. What you will discover if you do that is you'll hit that same point with that new idea. And that's why a lot of people have half-finished screenplays in their drawer and never get around to finishing one, getting it onto the marketplace and so on. So I urge you to resist that temptation. By all means, jot down your new ideas all the time, and there'll be something that are valuable to you to come back to. But don't let the discouragement of that dip stop you. It is a useful, practical thing to do at that point, to take a little break. Tell yourself, and put a timer on it. This is important, not to take an unlimited break, but say, I'm going to take 3 days off or a week off from working on this project. During that time, watch some great movies, read some great stuff, some books, etc. Get out into nature, have some walks, just refresh yourself and get your energy back, and then go back to the project. And you'll find often the problems that were plaguing you at that point now are easier to solve. There are a few very specific things too that you can do when you get stuck in the actual writing process. One of them is to remember that you don't have to write chronologically. So if I'm working along and let's say I get to a scene somewhere in Act 2 where I know, for instance, maybe my protagonist has to find out that his wife's been cheating on him, and I'm really having a hard time coming up with a fresh way to show that. So instead of sticking to that and day after day just trying to figure it out, I might put in a place marker in the script saying George finds out that his wife has been sleeping with his best friend, and then move on, because I know what George is going to do as a result of that. I know scenes that I want to have happen after that point. So I'll go ahead and write those. And sometimes I find in the course of writing those later scenes, actually, it comes to you from the dialogue, from the action of the later scene, what would be a good solution to what needs to happen before that scene in order to lead to it. So don't be afraid to jump around a bit in the script and write what you know, what you're ready to write, because often that will help you to write the bits that you're not ready to write right at that moment. You can also do something, this is interesting, there's a wonderful writer named Elmore Leonard who passed away not too long ago, but he wrote amazingly great characters and dialogue. Sometimes his plots were not the best, but his books are well worth reading anyway, just for the zany, amazing characters that he created. And I heard an interview with him, and he said sometimes he has to fire a character. And what he meant was that he had a character in mind, and it got to a point where this character had to do something to make the script work, or the novel for the most part in his case. And it didn't feel right. The character didn't seem right, or didn't want to do what he wanted the character to do. And he said, sometimes you just have to fire the character and bring in somebody who will do what you need them to do. Now, sometimes this is a matter of dealing with the same character, but setting up something earlier in the script that will make it plausible that they would do what you need them to do. For example, let's say you've got a meek character who normally would never become violent, but you need that in the story. And if you haven't set up the circumstances that make it believable that this character would do that, then you have to go back and plant those seeds. So for instance, in that situation, you might have it established in the first act, there's one thing that this guy or this woman cares about more than anything else. It could be their child, it could be their dog, it could be something that represents a value, their religious value, or whatever it is. That's the one thing they cherish the most in this world. And therefore, if that is threatened, it becomes plausible that they would do something very atypical that moves your plot along. So often that's an example of a Act 2 problem that you need to solve in Act 1. Instead of just sticking around in Act 2 and rewriting that scene, rewriting it, figure out what's the real problem. And often the solution is in something that you need to do earlier to prepare for that moment. And you can work backwards. This is a technique I find very helpful when you have a scene that's problematic, to ask yourself, what would need to happen in order to make this scene work right the way you want it to? It might be something, as in this example that I've just mentioned, about your character. It might be about setting. It could be about any aspect of the script, but what would need to be different and possibly established earlier in order for this scene to feel like it's logical and it works. One other useful question that you can ask yourself is, especially in Act 2, where you need to keep escalating things, what is the worst thing that can happen to my protagonist at this moment? And your job is to torture your protagonist, basically, to put them into situations that are exciting for the audience and that help the character to grow. If you've got a character arc that is a transformation from how a character is at the start of your movie to how they are at the end, well, then there have to be a series of sequence of events that make them change. So in the case of Ebenezer Scrooge, it's 3 ghosts visit him, and that's a pretty amazing thing to have happen. That would probably, change all of us if we had 3 ghosts visiting us. So the bigger the change is, the bigger the transformation, the more extreme the steps have to be that lead to it, that make us believe it. So that's one of the things, is what can happen that promotes change in my character. And of course, you also have to think about what are the setbacks that happen in every transformation. We know from our own experience, it's hard to change. So even when we're trying to change, we will encounter difficulties and setbacks and unexpected developments as a result of that. So those are a great source of action for your second act, particularly. In the first week of the course, we talk about some very specific methods that you can use to brainstorm to come up with ideas when you get stuck. These are things that I learned first. I started out writing sitcoms way back in many years ago in Hollywood, shows like Benson and Family Ties and so on. And sitcoms, there's a lot of episodes you need to crank out. I created a sitcom or an animated comedy for kids called Norman Normal. We did 56 episodes, and that's a lot of storylines. So, but early on, I realized that just sitting around and thinking what could happen is not a very productive way of coming up with ideas. So I started researching arenas in which people have to come up with ideas and looking for how they do it. And especially in the advertising world and also psychology were the two areas I studied, and discovered there are quite a few really useful methods that you can apply, very practical, to generate ideas, both at the big level, the macro level, and the micro level. And we'll discuss a bunch of those. And the other time that people tend to get stuck is that at that point when they are about to release the script. So I'll just finish with this. I know I've got coming to the end of my little segment here too, but we become fearful because we're nearly done. And we know the next thing is we have to send our baby out into the world. And what if it gets rejected? Well, first of all, I've got news for you. It will get rejected, at least by some people. That is also part of the process. So expecting the dip and knowing that rejection is part of the deal are the two big pieces of information that are unfortunately not so pleasant. But once you know them, and once you know that it is par for the course for those things to happen, they don't have too much power over you anymore. So a way to overcome that fear of letting go of the script is to be, just do it in steps. So if you have somebody whose judgment you respect, maybe somebody you met on a course at Raindance or online or whatever, in a writing group, show them the script. And it's very helpful to have somebody like that to swap with. They show you your material, their material, you show them yours, get some feedback. There's very little risk with that. You're not sending it to the marketplace yet. And do it step by step. So before it goes to an agent or producer, you can feel pretty confident that it's as good as you can make it. And that will take away some of that fear. Now, let me see, we've got a question. Is it not better to get rejected than accepted and have your script rewritten? Well, if your script is accepted, you will be paid, which is always nice because that buys you time to write some more scripts. Ideally, you will work with people who will give you the chance to do the rewrites if they feel that the script is weak in some way. And you always have the right to say no. So, if they say, we want to buy your script, but we feel that the nun who is your protagonist should be a hooker, et cetera, then you may say, well, you know what? Thanks, but I'll pass, because they want to make it totally different. Or you may say, you know what? You're going to pay me £100,000. I can put up with the pain of it because that's going to buy me 2 years or whatever period of time to write some more scripts. So that's up to you. There is a Writers Guild agreement now in America that they have to give you the first option on rewriting anything that they want changed. Now, sometimes they use that as a token thing and then hire somebody else anyway. But ideally, if they love the script enough, if they respect your writing, they respect the story, then they will work with you. And you have to be somewhat flexible. You have to be able to pick your battles as to when you resist changes and when you give into them. And my rule for that is, if it only makes it different, but not worse, then I'll go along with it. If it makes it worse, then I'll say no. Has the pandemic changed the content of what you're writing about? For example, will people want to see more uplifting comedies in the post-COVID world? I think they will. It hasn't, it's changed mine only in that I focused on a script that I'm just about finishing now, which is a contained script. That is, it's mostly in one setting, because I know there are a lot of people looking for that kind of thing, but it was a story I've had in mind anyway. So it wasn't, I didn't just do it because of COVID, but I think you're right. But I think there'll be a market for all kinds of material. I think people, as Simon kind of intimated, people will be anxious to go back to the cinema, as well as continuing to love Netflix and Hulu and so on. So I think whatever you're passionate about, write that rather than trying to anticipate the marketplace. Is that it? Is it wrong if I base the character of the Joker's wife on myself? No, I mean, I can't speak for your private life, but it's not wrong cinematically. There is an issue of, and I think you mentioned this in a question to Simon. I don't know whether he got to it, but there's a point about rights. You can't just write about a material, about a character that is copyrighted and owned by by a studio, for example. I can't just write a Batman movie and put it out into the marketplace. So that's an issue you'd have to look at legally. If you do have questions and that occur to you after our little time together here, my email is jurgenwolff@gmail.com, JURGENWOLFF, and at Gmail, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I hope it's been useful, and I will see some of you at the workshops, which starts Monday night, by the way. Thank you, Denise.
Well, thank you, Jurgen. Your comments are always so useful, and that we had a lovely Instagram chat yesterday. So thank you for that. I think we still have a bit more time, don't we, Denise, with Jurgen? Unless you're busy.
We do.
No, it's fine. I thought it was 15 minutes, so I was.
Oh yeah, but we have a half-hour slot here, so you're good for another 10, 12 minutes if you want to go on. And if no one has a question, I certainly have one.
Okay.
What is the most common mistake screenwriters make that screws their career up?
Well, the most common mistake is not thinking through the story sufficiently. We get very excited about an idea, and I know I do. I always want to get to the keyboard right away and start typing and start writing dialogue, and that's the most fun part. I think almost every screenwriter finds story construction the most difficult, most challenging part of the process, and we tend to love creating characters and writing dialogue and so on. But it really is useful to take the time ahead of time. Doesn't mean you have to know every beat of the story. In fact, the technique that I have found the most useful, and you have to try everything out yourself and find out what works for you. I know the major beats of the story, roughly what's going to happen in the story before I start. But I don't work out a detailed outline until I've written the first roughly quarter of the film. So I'll write the first 20 pages, 25 pages, pretty free form, and then I'll stop and work out the rest of the story, because my experience has been if I keep just freewheeling it, I'll write myself into a corner and it'll be a lot of rewriting. But that gives me some spontaneity and some freedom, and new characters come up in the first part of the script that I can then use later. But I do find it that a lot of times people just are so eager to get started that they don't take the time to make sure the story is sound. And on that, one of the most useful bits of advice that I've ever heard about story construction came from the guys who did South Park. And they gave a lecture one time, and they said that every scene needs to connect to the next scene, not with the term "and then," this happened, then happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, but rather therefore or but. In other words, this happens, but something else. There's an objection, there's an opposition, there's a problem. Or therefore, this leads directly to something else. And what that means is that the whole story is knit together by cause and effect, rather than stuff just happening. We've all seen movies which seem like random. There's a scene here, and then something else happens, and you think, just doesn't feel like it's really progressing, moving forward, etc. So that's a very useful bit of advice to test your script. And it doesn't mean, of course, that the therefore, the consequence of a particular scene happens as the next scene. It can happen later, and the connection may not be obvious to the audience. It's quite a fun experience for an audience to see something happen later and say, ah, that happened because 3 scenes ago, this happened. But you should know what the consequence is and how it all fits together.
Hey,
I see a
Jurgen,
question here.
Jurgen, you've got 3 questions. You've got 2 from, one from Claire, one from Carly, and one from Farzana. Can you read them?
Claire says, how much direction can we include in the screenplay? In manner of speaking, quietly, angrily, is this left to the director? Really good question. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's one of those things where my view digresses a bit probably from most people's, most writers, or at least most directors. And that's because your first audience for your script that is going to get your script sold is typically not a director, it's not an actor, it's somebody, a producer, or an agent, or their representative reading, their assistant reading it, etc. So your audience initially is the reader of that script that's going to get them excited about that script enough to want to buy it. And to make it a good reading experience for them, I think it's fine to put in things like that. I had an experience on a movie that I wrote called The Real Howard Spitz, which was starring Kelsey Grammer. And Amanda Donahoe was had the second lead role in it as his romantic interest. And I went to the filming on the set on the first day, and Amanda Donahoe was sitting in her chair with the script and a big marker, one of these big, broad marking pens, and she was kind of going, crossing stuff out. And somebody said, "What are you doing, Amanda?" And she said, "I'm crossing out all the places where the writer told me how to act, with parentheticals like angrily, etc." But the point is that those directions help the initial reader picture and imagine what was going on. It wasn't designed for her. It was designed for that reader who reads. I was a reader when I started out in Hollywood. And I would read tons of scripts every week. And after a while, you just kind of get tired and you look for something that's going to excite you. And the more guidance that you get in the script, not with camera directions, but with directions or stage directions that help you understand what the character's feeling, etc., the better. And so, up to a limit, obviously. But so I believe in putting those in. Let them cross it out later. I wasn't upset that Amanda Donahoe crossed out my directions. The movie got made. I got paid. Turned out okay. So that was more important. Have you ever written a biopic of a person or group of people? If so, do you have any advice? I have not. No, I have not written one myself. My advice is to remember that when you're writing it's a really tricky line to walk, path to walk, because not everything that happened in real life or in the order it happened in real life makes a good drama. So I think you have to have a certain fidelity and integrity to respect the life of that character, but you also have to have some freedom to combine events or characters, because you're writing a drama. And the rules of drama are different from everyday life. If we just shot somebody's everyday life, it wouldn't be very interesting most of the time. So you have to walk that line, but I think you'd be true to the spirit of what happened to the person and maintain your integrity, and yet still make the changes that are required to make it a compelling screenplay and compelling movie.
And the last one there from Farzana.
Best approach would be, I've got 2 actually. Best approach would be to look to the studios directly for a character from a franchise. To be honest, I think the best approach would be to make up your own character, because the likelihood they're going to give a new writer the rights to write about an established character are small. You can try it, you can approach them and see if that works. You would need to do that in order to have the script go anywhere, but just be aware that it's a rather unlikely event. And is there a way that you can use the spirit of the elements of the established franchise and yet come up with something original? That's probably going to be a better path for you. And last question, is there danger your script may go down the path of a novel? I state a lot more than is needed for the script. Again, what is needed for the script in production terms is very minimal. What is needed for the script to sell it, there's a bit more. So yes, of course, don't overdo it. I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but in the week 3, when we talk about structure and formatting and so on, I've got some examples of very successful films, scripts, and I'll read you, give you some examples of the narration that was written, the description that was written, and you'll see if you can make it exciting and vital, and use a method of writing in a way that really engages the senses of the reader, that will make them get excited about your script without going too far down the path of making it read like a novel. You still have to have it be the right length and the right format and so on.
Wow, you make a half hour slip by like a minute, Jurgen, and very entertaining too. So thank you very much, as usual.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And hope to see you. As I said, feel free to send me any questions if they occur to you after this. And hope to see some of you Monday night, 6:30.
That's right. And we have
7 p.m., not 6.
7 o'clock. 7 o'clock.
Oh, 7 o'clock. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
6:30 was the in-person version. 7 o'clock for the Zoom.
Right. And we have 2 sessions left, Jurgen, not that I expect you to stay. We have Rick Harvey and Batif talking about a postgraduate. And following that at 4:30, we have from Amsterdam, N.J. Simmons, who talks about personal branding.
Oh, great. I definitely want to see that one myself too.
Well, come back at 4:30.
I will.
Take a break. And again, everyone, big hands together for Mr. Jurgen Wolff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.